My name is Alex, and I've always been drawn to the fringes of the map, the places where the ink thins and gives way to blank spaces. Not because I was particularly brave or adventurous in the traditional sense, but because I found a certain solace in the unknown, a kind of quiet thrill in the possibility of something else. I worked as a freelance photojournalist, mostly focusing on wildlife and remote cultures. It wasn't a glamorous life, often involving long stretches of solitude and instant ramen, but it allowed me to indulge my curiosity and occasionally stumble upon stories that felt like whispers from a forgotten world. It was a particularly sweltering August day when the email arrived. My tiny apartment in Brooklyn was doing its best to imitate a sauna, the fan on my desk merely circulating the humid air. I was sifting through stock photos, trying to find a compelling image of a particularly uncooperative lemur for an article I was writing, when a new message popped up in my inbox. The sender was someone I vaguely knew, a man named Dr. Elias Thorne. Elias Thorne was an academic, a fringe scientist who'd made a name for himself in certain circles for his unorthodox theories on cryptozoology and undiscovered ecosystems. I'd met him a couple of times at obscure conferences, usually hunched over a table displaying grainy photographs of alleged mythical creatures or spouting theories about the survival of megafauna in remote pockets of the world. He was brilliant, undeniably, but also eccentric, with a wild glint in his eye that could be either captivating or unsettling, depending on the topic of conversation. The subject line of the email was simple: Wixpedition Opportunity, African Rainforest. My interest was immediately piqued. Thorne's previous ventures, as far as I knew, had been largely theoretical, fueled by grants and the unwavering belief of a small group of equally enthusiastic and perhaps equally eccentric colleagues. An actual expedition was a departure from his usual MO. I clicked the email open. It was surprisingly brief. Dear Alex, I hope this message finds you well. I am writing to you today with an invitation to join an upcoming expedition into a remote region of the Congo rainforest. Recent data suggests the possibility of a unique biological phenomenon within the unexplored depths of this area. Something that I believe could be of significant scientific interest. The expedition will be privately funded and will consist of a small, carefully selected team. Your experience in documentation and navigating challenging environments would be invaluable. If you are interested in learning more, please reply to this email, and I will provide further details. Sincerely, Dr. Elias Thorne. My first instinct was skepticism. Thorne's unique biological phenomena had, in the past, ranged from plausibles, rediscovering a thought, to be extinct species of insect to wildly improbable, proving the existence of a freshwater plesiosaur in Lake Tella. Still, the mention of the Congo rainforest, a place that had always held a certain mystique for me, was undeniably alluring. And the phrase, privately funded, hinted at a level of seriousness that Thorne's previous endeavors had lacked. I spent the next hour debating with myself. Part of me, the pragmatic journalist in me, scoffed at the idea of chasing after another, one of Thorne's fantastical theories. But the other part, the one drawn to the blank spaces on the map, felt a familiar tug of excitement. What if, just this once, Thorne was onto something real? What if there was something extraordinary hidden within the dense foliage of the African rainforest? Against my better judgment, I replied to the email. Within a few hours, I received a response from Thorne, inviting me to a meeting at a rather unassuming office building in downtown Manhattan. The address was new to me, not the usual cluttered university office I associated with him. This further fueled my curiosity. The meeting took place 2 days later. The office was surprisingly modern and sterile, a stark contrast to Thorne's usual chaotic environment. He greeted me with an almost manic energy, his eyes gleaming with excitement. He was thinner than I remembered, his usually disheveled hair even more untamed. "Alex, thank you for coming," he exclaimed, shaking my hand vigorously. "I knew you'd be intrigued." He ushered me into a small conference room, where a large map of Central Africa was spread out on the table. He pointed to a region deep within the Congo, an area marked with sparse details and a lot of green. "This," he said, his voice hushed with reverence, "is where we are going." He proceeded to explain the recent data he'd mentioned in his email. It turned out to be a collection of anecdotal reports from remote villages near the area, whispers of strange occurrences, unusual animal behavior, and sightings of something unidentifiable. There were also some satellite images showing unusual thermal signatures and patterns within a specific, isolated part of the forest. Individually, these pieces of information might seem insignificant, but Thorne had woven them together into a compelling narrative, a suggestion that something truly unique, something perhaps entirely unknown to modern science, resided in this remote region. He spoke with an almost religious fervor, his enthusiasm infectious despite my inherent skepticism. He showed me thermal images with inexplicable heat anomalies, local testimonies translated from various dialects, describing strange sounds and shadowy figures, and even a few blurry photographs that purported to show unusual tracks and vegetation patterns. Of course, Thorne admitted, preempting my obvious questions, "This is all preliminary. But I have a strong feeling, Alex, a very strong feeling that we are on the verge of a significant discovery." He then introduced me to the other member of the expedition team who was present at the meeting, a young woman named Lena Hansen. Lena was a biologist specializing in tropical ecosystems. She had a quiet intensity about her, her gaze sharp and intelligent. Unlike Thorne's chaotic energy, Lena exuded a calm competence that I found reassuring. She explained that she had been following Thorne's research for years and was particularly interested in the potential impact of whatever they might find on the local environment. "Docker, Thorne's theories have always been ambitious," Lena said with a wry smile, "but the data he's compiled from this region is genuinely intriguing. There are several documented instances of unique flora and fauna in the surrounding areas, suggesting a high degree of endemism. What we might find deeper within could be truly extraordinary. As Thorne continued to elaborate on his theories, I found myself getting drawn in. The sheer remoteness of the area, the lack of reliable information, the whispers of the unknown, it all combined to create an irresistible pull. I knew the risks. I knew Thorne's track record. But the opportunity to venture into a truly unexplored part of the world, with the potential to witness something completely new, it was an offer I couldn't easily refuse. Over the next few weeks, the preparations for the expedition were intense. Thorne, despite his eccentricities, proved to be surprisingly organized when it came to logistics. Lena meticulously compiled lists of necessary equipment, vaccinations, and safety protocols. My role, as Thorne emphasized repeatedly, was to document everything. He wanted high-quality photographs, detailed video footage, and thorough written accounts of our findings. We met a few more times before our departure. Thorne introduced us to a local guide, a man named Kofi, who would be essential for navigating the rainforest and interacting with the local communities. Kofi was a quiet and experienced individual with a deep understanding of the region and its people. He spoke excellent English and had a calm demeanor that inspired confidence. As the departure date drew nearer, a sense of anticipation, mixed with a healthy dose of apprehension, began to build within me. I packed my camera gear, my satellite phone, and a first aid kit that Lena had insisted on reviewing. I reread Thorne's preliminary reports and the translated local accounts, trying to form a mental picture of what we might encounter. The stories were fragmented and often contradictory, ranging from sightings of unusually large animals to whispers of strange lights and unsettling sounds emanating from the deepest parts of the forest. Some spoke of a malevolent presence, a guardian spirit that protected the heart of the rainforest. Others hinted at something far more ancient, something that predated human understanding. I tried to remain objective, to approach these stories with a journalist's critical eye. But as I looked at the satellite images, the blurry photographs, and the thermal anomalies, a seed of doubt began to sprout in my mind. What if there was more to this than just Thorne's wild theories? What if something truly extraordinary, something that shouldn't exist, was waiting for us in the depths of the African rainforest? The journey to our starting point was long and arduous, involving multiple flights and a bumpy ride in a heavily modified four-wheel drive vehicle. As we traveled deeper into the heart of the Congo, the landscape transformed from bustling towns to scattered villages, and finally to an unbroken expanse of dense, green jungle. The air grew thick with humidity, and the sounds of the rainforest, the incessant chirping of insects, the calls of unseen birds, the rustling of leaves in the canopy above, became our constant companions. Kofi proved to be an invaluable guide. His knowledge of the terrain and his affinity with the local people, essential. He shared stories of the forest, tales passed down through generations, speaking of hidden trails, dangerous creatures, and places best left undisturbed. As we established our base camp on the edge of the unexplored region. A sense of isolation settled over us. We were hundreds of miles from the nearest town, surrounded by an impenetrable wall of vegetation. The only connection to the outside world was our satellite phone, a fragile lifeline in this vast wilderness. The first few days were spent setting up camp, organizing our supplies, and conducting preliminary surveys of the surrounding area. Lena was in her element, meticulously collecting samples of plants and insects, her enthusiasm for the biodiversity of the rainforest palpable. Thorn, fueled by an almost manic energy, constantly consulted his maps and satellite data, his excitement growing with each passing hour. I, meanwhile, focused on documenting our journey, taking photographs and videos of the landscape, the wildlife, and our daily activities. But as the days wore on, a subtle shift began to occur. The sounds of the rainforest seemed to change, the calls of the animals becoming less familiar, more alien. We started noticing unusual tracks, larger than any known creature in the area. And there were the smells, strange, musky odors that would drift through the air without any discernible source. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the trees, Kofi gathered us around a small fire. His usual calm demeanor seemed to have been replaced by a quiet unease. "There are old stories here," he said, his voice low. "Stories of the deep forest. Stories of things that walk that should not walk." He spoke of a creature, a legend whispered among the local tribes, a being said to inhabit the most remote parts of the rainforest. He called it Mokel, Mbembe, a name that sent a shiver down my spine even before I fully understood its meaning. He described it as a large, reptilian creature with a long neck and a powerful tail, a creature that some believed to be a living dinosaur. Thorn, of course, was ecstatic. This aligned perfectly with his theories. Lena, ever the scientist. However, we soon discovered why. Remained more skeptical, but there were unexplained accounts of such a creature in the region's folklore. I listened intently, my journalist's instincts kicking in. Was this just folklore, a product of fear and imagination? Or was there a kernel of truth in these ancient stories? As the days turned into nights, the atmosphere in our camp grew increasingly tense. We began to hear strange sounds in the darkness, sounds that defied explanation, guttural roars, high-pitched screams, and something that sounded like heavy footsteps moving through the undergrowth. We increased our vigilance, taking turns on watch throughout the night. Armed with our flashlights and a few basic defense tools, we tried to reassure ourselves that these were just the sounds of the jungle, the calls of nocturnal animals. But there was an undeniable sense of unease, a feeling that we were being watched, that something was out there, in the darkness beyond our campfire, observing us. Then, one morning, we found it. A footprint. It was massive, easily twice the size of any animal track I had ever seen. It was three-toed, with thick, clawed digits, and it was pressed deep into the muddy ground, near the edge of our camp. Lena examined it carefully, taking measurements and photographs. Her usual scientific detachment seemed to falter slightly as she looked up at us, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and something akin to fear. This isn't anything I recognize," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "It's wrong." Thorn, on the other hand, was practically jumping with excitement. "This is it," he exclaimed. "This is proof!"
The Mokul. Bamba!
I knew it!
Kofi remained silent, his face etched with a deep concern. He looked at the footprint, then at the dense forest surrounding us, a look of dread in his eyes. "This is not good," he murmured. "This is not good at all." That footprint marked a turning point in our expedition. The whispers of the unknown had suddenly become a tangible reality. The thrill of discovery was now overshadowed by a growing sense of apprehension. We had journeyed deep into the African rainforest, seeking something extraordinary. We were about to find it, and I had a terrible feeling that we were not going to like what we found. The discovery of the footprint hung heavy in the air, a tangible piece of the unsettling puzzle we had stumbled upon. Thorn was practically vibrating with excitement, his initial skepticism replaced by an almost childlike wonder. He wanted to follow the tracks immediately, convinced they would lead us to his elusive Mokul, Bambi. Lena, though clearly disturbed by the size and unfamiliar nature of the print, approached it with a scientist's methodical curiosity. She carefully documented every detail, taking multiple photographs from different angles and collecting soil samples from within the impression. Kofi, however, was a picture of quiet dread. He stared at the footprint for a long moment, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. "This track, it is old," he said finally, his voice low and gravelly. "But I have never seen anything like it. The legends, they say the Mokul, Mbembe stays deep, in the heart of the impassable forest. If this is its track, we are going into a place where no man is meant to go." Despite Kofi's ominous warning, Thorn was determined to proceed. The allure of the unknown, the potential for a groundbreaking discovery, had completely overshadowed any sense of caution. He argued that this was the very reason they had come: to explore the unexplored, to uncover the secrets hidden within this remote wilderness. Lena, while more hesitant, agreed that they couldn't ignore such compelling evidence. Her scientific curiosity ultimately outweighed her apprehension. Reluctantly, Kofi agreed to lead us, his unease evident in his every movement. He consulted the footprint, trying to discern the direction of travel. The tracks, though old, seemed to head deeper into the forest, towards a region marked on our maps as virtually impenetrable. We packed up our camp, a palpable tension in the air. The familiar sounds of the rainforest now seemed to carry a more sinister undertone. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, made us jump. I kept my camera close, my finger hovering over the shutter button, ready to document whatever we might encounter. The forest grew denser as we ventured further inland. The sunlight barely filtered through the thick canopy overhead, casting the undergrowth in a perpetual twilight. The air was heavy with humidity and the smell of decaying vegetation. Giant ferns and tangled vines created a natural barrier making our progress slow and arduous. Kofi moved with a practiced ease, his machete expertly clearing a path through the dense foliage. We followed closely behind, our senses on high alert. The ground was uneven and treacherous, riddled with hidden roots and slippery patches of mud. We crossed narrow streams and climbed over fallen logs, our boots sinking deep into the soft earth. The silence of the deep forest was broken only by our heavy breathing and the occasional call of an unseen bird. Even the usually ubiquitous insects seemed to have fallen silent, adding to the unnerving atmosphere. As we pressed on, we began to notice more unusual signs. We found patches of vegetation that had been inexplicably flattened, as if something large and heavy had passed through. We saw trees with deep gouges in their bark, too high to have been made by any known animal in the region. And the strange smells persisted, that musky, almost reptilian odor lingering in the air, growing stronger the further we went. One afternoon, as we were making our way through a particularly dense thicket, we heard a sound that stopped us all in our tracks. It was a deep, resonant roar, unlike anything I had ever heard before. It echoed through the trees, sending a shiver down my spine. Even Thorn, in his excitement, looked momentarily startled. "What was that?" Lena whispered, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and fascination. Kofi's face was grim. "The forest speaks," he said softly. "It does not welcome us." We remained silent for a long moment, listening intently. The roar did not come again, but the oppressive silence that followed felt even more unsettling. We continued on, our pace quickening, a sense of urgency now driving us forward. Later that day, we stumbled upon something that made even Thorn's enthusiasm waver slightly. It was a clearing, a small open space in the dense forest. In the center of the clearing was a collection of bones. Not the scattered remains of a small animal, but large, bleached bones, some of them easily the size of a human femur. They were arranged in a strange, almost ritualistic pattern, forming a rough circle around a patch of bare earth. Lena approached the bones cautiously, examining them with her gloved hands. These are very old," she said, her voice subdued. "And they're not from any animal I recognize." Thorn, for once, was uncharacteristically quiet. He stared at the bones with a look of stunned disbelief. Kofi, meanwhile, refused to even enter the clearing. He stood at the edge of the tree line, his eyes darting nervously around. "This place is cursed," he muttered. "We should not be here." We took photographs of the bones, documenting their size and arrangement, but none of us could shake the feeling upon us that settled upon us in that clearing. It felt like we had stumbled upon something ancient and forbidden, a silent testament to a reality that lay far outside the realm of our understanding. As dusk began to fall, we decided to make camp for the night. Kofi insisted on building a large fire, much larger than we usually needed, claiming it would help to ward off any unwanted visitors. We ate our rations in silence, the crackling flames the only sound, breaking the oppressive stillness of the forest. The night was long and filled with unsettling noises. We heard strange rustling sounds. In the undergrowth, the distant hooting of owls that sounded strangely distorted. And once, a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the trees, abruptly cut short. Each sound sent a fresh wave of anxiety through our small group. I took the first watch, sitting by the fire with my flashlight, and a sense of growing dread. Every shadow seemed to take on a menacing form. Roverdo. Every rustle of leaves sounded like approaching footsteps. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone, that something was out there in the darkness, watching us. Around 3 in the morning, just as I was about to wake Lena for the next watch, I saw something. A flicker of movement in the periphery of my vision. I turned my head quickly, my heart pounding in my chest. At the edge of the firelight, standing between the trees, was a pair of eyes. They were large, luminous eyes, reflecting the firelight with an eerie intensity. They were unlike the eyes of any animal I knew, too big, too bright, and possessing a strange, almost intelligent quality. I stared at them, frozen, in fear, my hand instinctively reaching for the small knife I carried. The eyes remained there for a long moment, unblinking, as if studying me. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, they were gone, swallowed by the darkness of the forest. I scrambled to wake Thorn and Lena, my voice trembling. I saw something, I whispered urgently. Something watching us. They both sat up, their faces etched with concern. I described the eyes, the size and the strange luminescence. Kofi, who had also been awakened by my commotion, listened intently, his face pale in the firelight. The forest spirits, he murmured. They are showing themselves. They are warning us to leave. Thorn, predictably, was less inclined to believe in supernatural explanations. It was probably just an animal, he said, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. A large cat, maybe, or a primate. But I knew what I had seen. It wasn't the reflection of a cat or a primate. There was something else there, something that didn't belong. The following day, our progress was even slower. We were all on edge, constantly scanning our surroundings, listening for any unusual sounds. The oppressive atmosphere of the forest seemed to have intensified, as if the very air was thick with a sense of foreboding. Lena examined the droppings with a grim expression. This is definitely a large herbivore, she said. But I can't identify the bone fragments. They don't match anything in our database. Thorn's excitement was palpable. We're close, he kept repeating. I can feel it. Why? We're about to make history. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were venturing into something far more dangerous than Thorn could possibly imagine. The legends, the strange signs, the feeling of being watched, it all pointed towards something ancient and powerful, something that might not take kindly to being discovered. Towards late afternoon, we reached a small clearing dominated by a large, stagnant pool of water. The air here was thick and humid, buzzing with insects. The silence was almost absolute, broken only by the occasional croaking of a frog. As we approached the edge of the pool, Kofi suddenly stopped, holding up his hand. He pointed to the muddy bank. There, clearly visible in the soft earth, were the unmistakable tracks of the creature. And these were fresh, incredibly fresh. It had been here recently, perhaps just moments before. We cautiously approached the water's edge, our eyes scanning the murky depths. The surface of the pool was still and undisturbed. For a long moment, there was nothing. Just the oppressive silence and the feeling of anticipation hanging heavy in the air. Then, the water began to ripple. Slowly, deliberately, something began to rise from the depths of the pool. First, a long, serpentine neck, covered in rough, scaly skin. Then, a small, reptilian head, with large, intelligent eyes that seemed to fixate on us. It was the mokel, Mbemb. Or at least, something that fit the descriptions in the local legends. It was massive, far larger than I had imagined, its body mostly submerged beneath the murky water. It regarded us with a calm, almost curious gaze. For a moment, we were all frozen, speechless, staring in awe and disbelief at the creature before us. Thorn let out a gasp of pure elation. "It's real," he whispered. "It's actually real." Lena, her scientific mind immediately taking over, began to reach for her camera. I, too, fumbled for my equipment, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it, the discovery of a lifetime. But then something shifted in the creature's demeanor. Its eyes, which had been calm and curious, suddenly narrowed. A low growl rumbled from deep within its throat. The peaceful stillness of the clearing was shattered by a primal, terrifying sound. And then it moved. The long neck lashed out with incredible speed, striking towards us like a giant serpent. We scrambled back, startled by the sudden aggression. The creature pulled itself further out of the water, revealing a massive, barrel-shaped body and a long, powerful tail that thrashed through the vegetation. This was no gentle giant, no mythical creature content to remain hidden. This was something powerful, territorial, and very, very real. And it was clearly not happy to see us. Our moment of wonder had turned into a moment of terror. We had found something that shouldn't exist. And now it had found us. The speed of the mokel, Mbembe's attack, was terrifying. One moment it was a seemingly placid giant emerging from the water. The next it was a lightning, fast predator, its long neck snaked towards us, teeth bared in a silent snarl. We scattered, scrambling backwards away from the water's edge, adrenaline surging through our veins. Lena shrieked, stumbling over a root as she tried to retreat. Thorn, his initial awe replaced by sheer panic, tripped and fell, scrambling to his feet with a desperate yelp. Kofi, despite his fear, reacted instantly, grabbing my arm and pulling me behind a thick cluster of bamboo. The creature's head crashed into the spot where we had been standing moments before, its powerful jaws snapping shut with a sickening thud. The force of the impact shook the ground. We could smell its breath, a foul, musty odor that made my stomach churn. "Run," Kofi yelled, shoving me forward. "Get into the trees." We didn't need any further encouragement. We plunged into the dense undergrowth, pushing through tangled vines and thorny bushes, the sounds of the enraged creature crashing through the foliage behind us. Its massive body was surprisingly agile, tearing through the jungle with alarming speed. Glanced back and saw it lumbering after us, its powerful tail whipping back and forth, flattening everything in its path. Its reptilian head weaved from side to side, its intelligent, malevolent eyes searching for us. The image was seared into my mind, a living dinosaur, a relic of a forgotten age. Now, hunting us through the heart of the African rainforest. Lena and Thorn were struggling to keep up, their city shoes offering little grip on the uneven terrain. I could hear Lena's panicked gasps and Thorn's heavy breathing as we fled deeper into the green hell. "This way," Kofi shouted, veering sharply to the right. He seemed to have a better sense of direction than the rest of us, his years of experience in the forest proving invaluable. We followed him blindly, our lungs burning, our bodies scratched and bruised by the unforgiving undergrowth. The roars of the creature echoed through the trees, growing closer, then fading slightly, only to return with renewed ferocity. It was hunting us, and it was relentless. After what felt like an eternity, Kofi suddenly stopped, pointing towards a narrow ravine, partially hidden by thick vegetation. "Down there," he gasped. "Maybe it cannot follow." Without hesitation, we slid down the steep embankment, the loose soil and rocks giving way beneath our feet. We landed in the ravine with a series of thuds and gasps, our bodies aching from the impact. The ravine was narrow and overgrown, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. It offered some cover, but I knew it wouldn't stop the creature for long. We huddled together, catching our breath, listening for any sign of our pursuer. For a moment, there was only the sound of our ragged breathing and the distant chirping of birds. Then, we heard it, the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps crashing through the undergrowth above us. The Mokal, Mbembe, had tracked us. "One need to keep moving," Lena whispered, her face pale and streaked with dirt. Her arm was bleeding from a long scratch, probably from a thorny vine. Thorn, his face ashen, nodded in agreement. He seemed to have lost his initial excitement, replaced by a stark realization of the danger we were in. We continued down the ravine, the dense vegetation providing some concealment. But the terrain was difficult, and our pace was slow. We knew it was only a matter of time before the creature caught up to us. Suddenly, Kofi stopped again, his eyes wide with fear. He pointed to the ground. There, in the soft mud, were fresh tracks. Not just one set, but multiple sets, all heading in the same direction as the ravine. And they weren't the three toed prints of the Mokal, Mbembe. These were smaller but still disturbingly large, with 4 distinct claw marks. "Something else is here," Kofi whispered, his voice trembling. "Something. I don't know." The realization sent a fresh wave of terror through me. We weren't just being hunted by one prehistoric monster. There might be others. The rainforest, which had seemed so vibrant and full of life, now felt like a terrifying, primeval world filled with unknown dangers. As we continued along the ravine, the vegetation began to thin out. We emerged into a more open area, a small clearing with a rocky outcrop in the center. It offered a clear view of our surroundings, but also left us exposed. "We need to find somewhere to hide," Lena said urgently, scanning the clearing. The rocky outcrop seemed like our best option. It was steep and jagged, but it might provide a temporary refuge. We scrambled towards it, hoping to reach the higher ground before the creature found us again. Just as we reached the base of the outcrop, we heard a deafening roar that shook the very ground beneath our feet. The Mokal then burst into the clearing, its massive form filling our vision. It had found us. We scrambled up the rocky slope, our hands and feet scraping against the rough stone. The creature roared again, its eyes fixed on us, with predatory intent. It tried to follow, but the steep incline and the jagged rocks seemed to impede its progress. We reached a small ledge near the top of the outcrop. Just as the Mokal slammed its massive head against the rocks below, sending a shower of debris raining down on us. We huddled together, terrified, watching as the creature paced back and forth at the base of the outcrop, its frustrated roars echoing through the forest. We were trapped. The sun began to set, casting long, ominous shadows across the clearing. The temperature dropped, and a chill permeated the air. We were exhausted, injured, and terrified. Our water supplies were dwindling, and we had no idea how long we could remain on this exposed ledge. As darkness enveloped the rainforest, the sounds of the jungle intensified. We heard the familiar chirping of insects and the calls of nocturnal animals. But there were other sounds too, strange rustlings in the undergrowth, distant howls, and the unsettling sound of something large moving stealthily through the trees. The Mokal remained at the base of the outcrop, its massive silhouette barely visible in the darkness. We could hear its heavy breathing and the occasional snap of branches as it moved around. We knew it was still there, waiting for us. Suddenly, Kofi gasped, pointing into the darkness beyond the clearing. "Look," he whispered, his voice filled with a renewed sense of terror. Emerging from the trees were several pairs of glowing eyes, similar to the ones I had seen near our campfire. But these were closer, and there were more of them. They moved with a fluid, silent grace, circling the rocky outcrop, their luminous eyes fixed on us. They were smaller than the Mokal, but there were at least 4 or 5 of them. Their forms were indistinct in the darkness, but I could make out long, slender bodies and sharp, pointed snouts. They looked like some kind of predatory reptile, but unlike anything I had ever seen. The Mokal seemed to notice them too. It let out a series of low growls, a clear warning to these new arrivals. The glowing eyes flickered in response, but the creatures did not retreat. Instead, they seemed to be waiting, watching. We were caught between 2 dangers: the massive Mokal, below, and these smaller, equally menacing creatures surrounding us in the darkness. Our situation had gone from bad to unimaginably worse. Sleep was impossible. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent our hearts racing. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. We were trapped on this small ledge, exposed and vulnerable, surrounded by unknown predators in the heart of a primeval forest. As the night wore on, the sounds of the rainforest became increasingly bizarre and unsettling. We heard high, pitched shrieks that sounded almost human, guttural croaks that resonated deep within the earth, and a strange, rhythmic drumming that seemed to come from the depths of the forest. Just before dawn, the Mokul, Mbembe, let out a series of deafening roars that echoed through the trees, seemingly in response to something we couldn't see. The creatures with the glowing eyes also became more agitated, their hissing and snapping sounds growing louder. Then, as the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the canopy, we saw it. A large shape moving through the trees towards the clearing. It was big, even bigger than the Mokul, Mbembe, with a dark, hulking form that seemed to absorb the light. The Mokul, Mbembe, which had been so menacing just hours before, now seemed agitated, even frightened. It turned towards the approaching shape, letting out a series of frantic roars that sounded more like cries of distress. The new creature emerged from the trees, and I gasped in horror at the sight of it. It was vaguely reptilian in form, but its features were grotesque and distorted. Its skin was a patchwork of different textures, like had been pieced together from various animals. It had multiple limbs, some ending in sharp claws, others in fleshy, tentacle-like appendages. Its head was a nightmarish amalgamation of different creatures, with too many eyes and a gaping maw filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth. It was an abomination, something truly unnatural, something that should not exist, and it was heading straight for the clearing. The Mokul, Mbembe, sensing the new threat, turned to face it, its initial aggression forgotten. The two monstrous creatures met in the center of the clearing, and a battle of titans ensued. The ground shook with their roars and the force of their blows as they clashed, tearing at each other with savage fury. We watched in horrified fascination from our precarious perch, completely forgotten in the face of this even greater terror. What we had found in the African rainforest was far more terrifying than any cryptozoological mystery. We had stumbled upon something truly ancient, something truly monstrous, something that defied all understanding. And our nightmare had just begun. The battle between the two monstrous creatures was a scene of unimaginable horror. The Mokul, Mbembe, despite its size and power, seemed outmatched by the sheer alien nature of its opponent. The grotesque creature moved with an unnatural fluidity, its multiple limbs flailing, tearing at the Mokul, Mbembe's thick hide. The air was filled with their deafening roars, the snapping of jaws, and the sickening sound of tearing flesh. We huddled on the ledge, paralyzed by fear, watching the brutal spectacle unfold below. The creatures with the glowing eyes scattered, seemingly unwilling to get caught in the crossfire of this titanic clash. "We have to get out of here," Lena whispered, her voice trembling. "While they're distracted." It was a risky proposition. Descending the rocky outcrop would leave us exposed, but staying there meant risking being caught in the middle of the fight or facing whichever monster emerged victorious. Kofi nodded grimly. "Lena is right," Now is our chance. Carefully, we began to climb down the backside of the outcrop, away from the raging battle. The descent was treacherous, the rocks loose and jagged. We moved slowly and cautiously, trying to make as little noise as possible. Just as we reached the bottom, we heard a final, agonizing roar from the mokel. Bem, followed by a sickening crunch. We didn't dare to look back, but the sounds told a grim story. The abomination had won. We turned and fled into the dense forest, moving as quickly and quietly as we could. The sounds of the victorious creature tearing into its fallen foe echoed behind us, a chilling reminder of the danger we had escaped. We stumbled through the undergrowth, our bodies aching, our minds reeling from the horrors we had witnessed. The forest, once a place of mystery and wonder, now felt like a terrifying labyrinth, filled with unimaginable threats. We traveled for what felt like hours, pushing ourselves to our physical and mental limits. We dared not stop for long, knowing that the creature that had defeated the mokel, Mbem, could be anywhere. The glowing-eyed predators also remained a lurking threat in the darkness. As we moved, we began to notice more signs of the grotesque creature. We found patches of strangely melted vegetation, as if touched by some corrosive substance. We saw trees twisted into unnatural shapes, their bark scarred with deep, irregular gouges. And the musky, reptilian smell was now accompanied by a new odor, a sickly sweet, almost chemical scent that made our stomachs churn. The psychological toll of our experience was immense. Every shadow seemed to hide a monster. Every rustle of leaves sounded like approaching footsteps. We were constantly on edge, our nerves struggling to process the reality of what we had seen. After what seemed like an eternity, we finally stumbled upon a familiar trail, one that Kofi had marked on our way in. It was a small beacon of hope in the overwhelming darkness. Following the trail, we eventually reached our abandoned base camp. It was deserted, our tents ripped and torn, our supplies scattered. The mokel, Mbembe, hadn't reached it. But something else had. We could see the sanged tracks with 4 claws that we had found earlier. We salvaged what little supplies we could find, some water, a few remaining rations, and my satellite phone. Thankfully, it still had power. We knew we had to get out of the rainforest as quickly as possible. The journey back was a blur of exhaustion and fear. We moved constantly, only stopping to rest when we were physically unable to continue. We encountered other strange creatures, insects with glowing carapaces, primates with unnaturally elongated limbs, but thankfully nothing as large or as terrifying as the mokel, Mbembe, or the abomination we had seen. Finally, after days of relentless travel, we reached the edge of the rainforest and stumbled into a small, remote village. The villagers were initially wary of our disheveled appearance, but Kofi, using his local connections, managed to explain our situation, omitting the more unbelievable details. We were flown out of the region a few days later, leaving behind the horrors we had witnessed. Back in civilization, the world felt strangely normal, almost surreal, in stark contrast to the primeval nightmare we had just escaped. Lena, ever the scientist, tried to rationalize what we had seen, focusing on the unique biodiversity of the region and the possibility of undiscovered species. But even she couldn't fully explain the grotesque creature, the thing that seemed to defy all biological laws. Thorne, on the other hand, became even more obsessed with his theories, convinced that we had glimpsed a hidden ecosystem, a forgotten corner of the world, teeming with unimaginable life. He tried to organize another expedition, but no one, including Lena and myself, would agree to go back. As for me, I returned to my quiet life in Brooklyn. But the memory of the African rainforest, the roar of the Mokil, Mumbem, the sight of the abomination, the terror in Kofi's eyes, it all stayed with me. I tried to write about it, to make sense of what we had experienced, but the words always seemed inadequate, failing to capture the true horror of what we had encountered. I showed my photographs and videos to experts, but the blurry images only raised more questions than answers. Some dismissed them as elaborate hoaxes, others suggested they were misidentified known species. No one could explain the creature we had seen in the clearing. Sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet. However, we soon discovered why. I find myself looking at the blank spaces on the map, wondering what else might be lurking in the unexplored corners of our world. We journeyed deep into the African rainforest, searching for the unknown. We found it. And I pray that nothing like it is ever found again. Some things are better left undiscovered, lurking in the shadows, existing only in nightmares. Because sometimes, true scary stories are the ones that defy explanation. The ones that leave you with a chilling certainty that there are things in this world that should simply not exist.